Good evening, everyone. We are live in San Carlos, California. My name is Courtney Granville, and I am the Chief Scientific Officer at GoTo for Lung Cancer. I want to start out by welcoming everyone to the Lung Cancer Living Room, whether you are here or live online with us. You know, the living room was really started to be a place of hope. We have the word written here on the wall. And it was started by GoTo's founder, Bonnie Adario, who is here with us today. We're so glad you're here, Bonnie. I believe she really started this to bring hope and to bring conversations really into the light for people. And so we hope to bring some enlightenment today, to bring information to the people who really need it. The living room offers that opportunity for us to bring experts and key opinion leaders straight to you so that you can hear live from them about the things that are important to you. That was actually the perfect intro to bring us into our topic today, which is clinical trials. So I think the thing about clinical trials is when you're first facing a diagnosis, it's not really something that you think about. And in fact, I think even as you're progressing through treatment, it's something that a lot of patients really shy away from. They don't really want to discuss. The reality is that for many, clinical trials can actually play an important role in their treatment, in addition to being a great way to inform the next generation of support and therapy and survivorship. So this evening, our goal is really to demystify clinical trials and provide information in 4 key areas. One is really, what is a clinical trial and what isn't it? The second is, how do I know if I'm eligible for a trial? Who's eligible for trials? What makes me qualified to be in a trial or not be in a trial? Third, when is it that a person should be thinking about a trial and discussing that with their care provider? And fourth, how can I find a clinical trial if I am interested? I can tell you that I do not have all of the answers, but we are very lucky to have Dr. Jorge Nieva here with us, and he's going to help clarify some of these topics today. We think that you are the perfect person to be here with us today. In addition to seeing patients and running a research program, I did find out that you really are an innovator in terms of creating multidisciplinary teams. And in fact, you have won awards from the National Cancer Institute as well as the American Society of Clinical Oncology for excellence in the conduct of clinical trials. So we are very honored to have you here today. You are the right person to really bring some of the information forward that we know that we really need. So maybe we could dive into clinical trials now. And I think in the spirit of demystifying clinical trials, maybe we just start with, what is a clinical trial?
Well, a clinical trial is a rigorous and systematic way to find out if a new treatment is good. And rather than relying on just treating a bunch of patients with the new treatment and then kind of looking back and saying, well, how did they do? We define everything prospectively. We do it all moving forward. We define what we're going to look at. And in that way, all the parameters are all very controlled. Everything is very rigorous in the way the analysis is done, so that we try to minimize biases that would naturally occur if we just treated a bunch of patients and decided, oh, well, look, it looks like the red-haired people did better, or oh, it looks like over here when we do this, the people's CT scans show a slight better improvement. We don't want to define those things after the fact. We want to define everything prospectively. So it's just a way of testing out either a new treatment or a comparison of 2 old treatments, or maybe an old treatment plus a new treatment to find out if these things need to be mixed together in order to provide the best outcomes. And there's lots of different types of clinical trials. There are some clinical trials where we're not even testing a new drug. There are some trials where we're just testing a new biomarker to find out if it's useful. Or we want to do a study to find out if a new way of applying the drugs might be better. But in any case, it's just a rigorous scientific investigation really designed to find out if something should change how we do things normally.
Yeah, that's really important, really helps move the field forward if we can find new and better ways, more effective ways.
It's the only way that the next generation of cancer patients gets better care than the prior generation. And it's really all the advances that we've made in lung cancer over the last 10 years. There's probably about 400,000 people alive with us today who are with us only because our treatments got better. And the only reason they're with us and those treatments got better is because some other lung cancer patients said, yeah, I'm going to participate in a clinical trial to find out if the new is better than the old. Just imagine there was that first patient who had to say, oh, you've got this drug, it's a tyrosine kinase inhibitor against EGFR. I wonder if that'll be better than chemotherapy. I don't know. Well, people signed up for that clinical trial and agreed to, yeah, I'll try the new tyrosine kinase inhibitor. Or someone said, I'm going to try the new checkpoint inhibitor. I want to see if immunotherapy will work. Every advance that we've made has happened because patients decided, yes, I want to try to help in this endeavor. I want to try to move things forward.
Yeah, and that was really pivotal. In fact, I remember those EGFR inhibitors very well because that was around the time I was doing my doctoral work, and these targeted therapies were really first coming of age for lung cancer. So really so important. I think one of the things that is confusing is this business about phases of clinical trials. So maybe you could help us understand a little bit, what are the different phases of clinical trials and what do they mean? Why are they important?
Yeah. So when new drugs are developed, either by pharma or in academic settings, the first thing they want to know is, what's the best way to use it? What's the best dose to give the patients? What's the best schedule? Should it be given once a week? Should it be given every 2 weeks? All that gets worked out in phase 1. And phase 1 is where we find out, what's the right dose. And so patients sometimes in phase 1 clinical trials won't all be treated with the same dose of the medicine. The first patients who enroll will get a lower dose. And if it's safe in that group of patients, the next group will get a higher dose, and the group after that will get a higher dose. Sometimes dose doesn't matter very much. With the checkpoint inhibitors, turned out dose didn't really matter all that much. And with some of the targeted agents, dose actually doesn't matter over a very wide range. But we don't know that when we start. And so that's where that learning occurs in phase 1. And a lot of times, phase 1 trials will be open not just to one disease type, they'll be open to all diseases. They may allow many different types of cancers in phase 1. Phase 2 clinical trials, that's where we find out, really, now that we've got the dose, let's get some precision around just how well it works. So that's where we get these very good measures of, well, in what percentage of patients did it shrink the tumors? In what subgroups did it work to shrink the tumors? What benchmarks in terms of average survival times or time before the tumor started to regrowth? All that gets worked out in phase 2, usually in a relatively small number of patients, usually under 100 in phase 2. Still might be a national trial or an international trial, but it's important to get those numbers because you need them for the next step. And phase 3 is when you make a comparison and you say, okay, well, now we're going to test it against a benchmark, against the old standard. We're going to now do phase 3 trials where it's going to be, maybe it's the new drug plus what we did before, or maybe it's the new drug against what we did before. And you need those precise numbers from phase 2 to know how many patients you need in phase 3. Because if it's a huge breakthrough, there was this study that was done in microsatellite unstable rectal cancer, where every patient who received the drug was effectively cured. Well, that clinical trial had under 20 patients in it. And you don't need more than 20 patients if everybody's getting cured. But if it's a small difference, if you're looking at, say, I'm going to shrink the tumor in 40% of the patients instead of 30% of the patients, well, now to get the statistics right, you need a lot of people for that. You get all those numbers from phase 2, and that designs phase 3 and determines, well, how many patients do we need? How much is it going to cost to do the study? Do we need to do it at 100 sites or do we need to do it at 10 clinical sites? But for the patients participating in a phase 3 trial, that means that you're participating in a, this is where the rubber meets the road kind of trial. That's where you're really finding out, is this new treatment, is it really going to be better? And phase 3 trials can have different aspects to them. A lot of times in a phase 3 trial, the patients will, for example, be able to cross over. Like if it's a very exciting new drug and the patient, they flip a coin effectively, or say, okay, heads you get the old drug, tails you get the new drug. And people say, I got the old drug, and they feel kind of disappointed by it. A lot of studies now will have crossover where if the old drug stops working, well, now you get access to the new drug. So the trials are built with systems and things to make it an attractive trial to the patients. Sometimes in a phase 3 trial, it's not a coin flip. It's a 2-to-1 coin flip or a 3-to-1 coin flip where you have 2 chances to get this new medicine and 1 chance to get the old standard. And they'll do that when the new drug is particularly exciting. Then there's something called phase 4. That's when the drug's already approved. And then we're just going back to get more data. And so still doing rigorous evaluation and rigorous investigation, but it's with a drug that's already on the market.
Okay. Interesting. I have a couple of follow-up questions from that. One is, why would you need to get more data on a drug that's already gone to market? It's really encouraging to hear that about crossover, and that if drugs are really working, that there's an opportunity for somebody who might have been with an existing drug to get that experimental drug. But I wonder if you could expand a little bit on standard of care too, and how that plays into clinical trial, what that term standard of care means and how that plays in.
Sure. So standard of care, I'll start with that one.
Okay.
That's pretty easy. That's how we normally do things. And the whole idea of a clinical trial is to start doing things differently. But we have a way that we do things now. So for example, when I was a trainee and I was learning how to do oncology, the standard of care in lung cancer was that you got 1 drug from the platinum family and you got 1 other drug, either Taxol or something along those lines. And that was the standard of care at the time. Now the standard of care now is evolved and very different. So now we don't even think of lung cancer as one disease. We think of it as a lot of different diseases, each one with its own unique biomarker. So when we start talking about lung cancer, we have to say, okay, well, which subgroup of lung cancer are we talking about? Okay, we're talking about KRAS lung cancer. And we say, okay, well, now the standard of care for KRAS lung cancer is going to be maybe chemo with an immunotherapy, or if the PD-L1 score is very high, it might be immunotherapy alone. Sometimes there's more than one standard of care. There's still some disagreement as to what people like to do for KRAS mutated lung cancer. Some people will say, well, 2 checkpoint inhibitors and chemotherapy. Some will say, 1 checkpoint inhibitor and chemotherapy. And some people will say, just 1 checkpoint inhibitor by itself in certain circumstances. So when a clinical trial is developed, they'll decide, okay, what are we going to consider the standard? And sometimes they'll let more than 1 standard be used. There's a very good clinical trial going on right now called the Pragmatica trial. I don't know if people are familiar with Pragmatica, but it's for second-line treatment of lung cancer, people who were on a checkpoint inhibitor, Keytruda, and then it stopped working for them. And so the clinical trial is very simple. Either you add a drug called ramucirumab and keep going, or you get switched to chemo, and it can be any chemo the doctor wants to use. The trial doesn't specify. And it's going to compare, well, is it better to continue the checkpoint inhibitor with this additional vascular endothelial growth factor drug? Or is it better just to switch to chemo with the understanding that all the chemos are going to do about the same? So asking a very specific scientific question that way. So the standard of cares can be many different types of standard of cares. Now to get back to the first part of the question, which was expanding on
the phase 4 and
phase
why
4.
you would want to go back and get more data.
And a lot of times we do phase 4 because we want to know about toxicity in bigger groups of people. Maybe the clinical trial that got the drug approved only had a few people. An example of that would be all the RET inhibitors, right? All got approved with under 100 patients. So you may want to then have a phase 4 trial where you say, well, let's continue to evaluate how people are doing, but let's find another couple of hundred patients and make sure that there are not weird things that happen in 1%, 2%, or 3%, or maybe we want to compare different ethnic groups. We want to see, do African American patients have the same outcomes as Latino patients, as Asian patients? Because sometimes your phase 3 clinical trial just isn't big enough to gather some of that information. So you just want more data, and you want to collect that data always prospectively. You always want to define the data you want to look for, and then find the patients, and then look ahead. Because again, when we look back and we just say, well, what if we just made a registry of all the RET patients and look back? You can't always collect blood. It can sometimes be hard. You can't always be free of biases, because some people who choose to participate may be kind of different people than the people who enroll in a phase 3 trial. So you get a little bit of a different experience, different patient population when you do things in that kind of prospective manner. Sometimes it's not possible, though, to do a prospective phase 4 study. It's just not feasible. And then we do have to do the retrospective studies, build registries, because we still get a lot of valuable information from those types of studies, too.
Well, I'm glad to hear you say that, because GoTo does have a registry that we're quite proud of, and we're growing to incorporate more forms of data in the future, hopefully to allow researchers such as yourself and others who are interested to look at the data.
Well, the great thing about registries like the one GoTo is setting up is it's very broad-based. FDA asks a pharma company to do a phase 4 study. It's only going to be about one drug, and it's only going to be asking a very narrow question. And so sometimes if you want to ask very broad questions, or sometimes you don't know what question you really want to ask, and you think that maybe 3-4 years from now, when we know more, we're going to ask better questions. And you think to yourself, gee, I wish I had a registry where I could go back and ask those questions. And then you say, thank God for the GoTo Foundation.
Well, you better look out, because I'm going to be coming to ask you what I should be including in the registry.
How can, just for example, every patient in this room get the right treatment? How can they get that? How can they access that if they don't have a living room or they don't have, a place like that to go?
I'll tell you, the best way to be sure that you're getting the right treatment is if you're enrolled in a clinical trial. Because when you're enrolled in a clinical trial, you know that everything is being rigorously looked over, not just by your doctor, but by a pharma company and the FDA and an ethics board and a clinical trial research organization and a monitor. When you enroll in a clinical trial, there's about 10 people overlooking what you're doing.
Well, and that's amazing. That's absolutely amazing. What does the patient do when they're being treated by a physician that doesn't believe in clinical trials?
I think all physicians, in a sense, believe in clinical trials, because if they didn't believe in clinical trials, they would never change what they're doing. But everyone sort of learns and develops new skills and starts treating people differently as innovations come out. But I think there's a lot of physicians that can't do clinical trials because their office just doesn't have the resources. It's a small private office, and it takes a lot of people to conduct a clinical trial. It's actually a very labor-intensive process. Every single data point is signed off on, validated, cross-checked, entered into a central database. There's regulatory components. It really does take a staff to do it, and not every physician has a staff. So if a patient wants to participate in a clinical trial, but their local physician doesn't have one to offer them, I would say that the first thing would be to ask your local university and go get a second opinion at a local university and ask them, well, do you have any clinical trials? You can look at clinicaltrials.gov. Clinicaltrials.gov is got a lot of information. And you almost have to have a little bit of expertise to really look at it. Now, you could call the GoTo Foundation and you could get some guidance.
There you go.
All right.
And there's lots of people here at GoTo that can help you and let you know, if your question really is, am I missing out on something hot? What's really big in the field right now? What is the thing I really don't want to miss? Then GoTo is a wonderful resource that you can contact and say, hey, this is my situation. This is where I'm at. Can I talk to someone who's got a little bit of expertise and who knows enough that they can kind of guide me and point me in the right direction?
And I wanted to add to that too, because as somebody who has been at GoTo now for 4 months, I sort of look at this in two different ways. GoTo is really all about the patients, but we're also by the patients. So what I mean by that is, all of you who are sitting here today, those of you who are watching us live, you become also a conduit for this great information, because the reality is that many of us are lucky enough to be near large academic centers or even near community hospitals where healthcare providers are plugged in and they understand that there are options. But there are also a number of people who don't find themselves in that situation. And it's really through finding a support system, whether it's through those of you who are here, through others that they might meet through their provider. Maybe they're lucky enough to find out about the GoTo helpline and give a call. We do have a program called Lung Match, which is actually staffed by people with pretty advanced degrees. We have a number of nurses as well as PhD scientists who are very adept at communicating in a very clear and easy to understand way. And they can help navigate folks and educate. I guess navigate's the wrong word. We don't provide any medical advice, but we do provide support and we provide education about what a diagnosis means, what a biomarker report might mean. We do encourage people to get biomarker testing done if they haven't. And for people who find themselves in the stage where they are interested in getting that best care, they are interested in being in a trial, we can help them sort through clinicaltrials.gov. We actually have a clinical trials finder on our website as well. If you're web savvy, you can go on and search that. You can call us and we can also talk you through various options. So thank you for putting in that plug for us.
Well, I think there are certain things that humans still do much better than AI. And talking to a human and really getting a sense of really what is this person's situation, you can gain a great deal of insight as to really what direction to point someone.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I wanted to sort of summarize a little bit of what you said, because you've provided some really great basic information about clinical trials, what they are, how they're used, what the various phases are. And I think trying to take my scientific hat off, I think it all sounds rather complex, actually. And it all sounds like it would take quite a bit of time. You mentioned things like needing to make sure you have the right people enrolled in your trial, needing to make sure that you understand biomarkers, needing to reach people in various places. How does a clinical trial actually come together? Who are the various individuals and organizations that get involved in really putting clinical trials together?
So clinical trials can come from a lot of different places. Organizations like Alchemy might write a clinical trial, or the National Cancer Institute of the United States, or a pharma company, or an academic at a university. And they define the scientific question that they're trying to answer. And it may be, is drug A better than drug B? Or it may be something more like, is strategy A better than strategy B? Whatever the question, they define the question. And then they decide, who are the patients that we're going to need for this? And how many do we need to answer the question? And so is this a trial that I can do myself, just at USC, where I am, at the Norris Cancer Center? Or do I need to call up all my colleagues in California and get them to participate as well? Or do I need a national organization to do it? Or do I need an international organization to do it? Because I'm going to need thousands of people to answer the question. Not enough people participate in clinical trials in the United States. It's only a few percentage of all cancer diagnoses. We certainly need more people in the US to participate. But any of these organizations can develop a trial, write a study protocol, and these study protocols can range from being 50-page documents to 500-page documents. There can sometimes be tremendous complexity involved with them. On the patient side, though, you're really going to have to trust the physician that you're working with, because ultimately it's you and the clinical investigator, and that clinical investigator's likely going to be your physician. And they will guide you in terms of, what's a good clinical trial for you, what's the right clinical trial for you, and ultimately you have to decide if it's something you want to participate in. Now, the patient doesn't have to read the whole protocol. The patient gets a consent form, usually written at 8th grade language, and they're still way too long. There may be 20, 30-page documents explaining what happens on each day in the clinical trial. But it's something you talk about with your family, you talk about with your physician, and you decide, is this something I want to participate in? Is this something that's for me? Now, not everybody can participate, because you have to be kind of healthy to participate in clinical trials. Most clinical trials won't let you participate if you're kind of sick and frail, or if you've got a bad heart or bad kidneys, or something along those lines. A tumor oftentimes has to be visible and measurable. And sometimes, especially with lung cancer, it's not, because the lung sometimes collapses around the tumor, and then its edges become indistinct, and then there's not something that we can always measure. The clinical trial participants have to not be usually getting any other clinical trial. So usually you can only do one at a time. And a lot of times, clinical trials only want you at the moment you're changing therapy. Mm-hmm. So you can't be on a treatment doing fine and then say, oh, I want to try this new clinical trial drug. I hear it's very exciting. Most clinical trials require that your current treatment not be working, or that it be your first treatment. So this is very tough for patients, because the window of opportunity to participate in a clinical trial is kind of narrow. And I've had patients come to me who were very good clinical trial candidates. I had a very exciting clinical trial for them, and they said, Dr. Nieva, I'm very interested in your clinical trial, but I just saw Dr. So-and-so across the street, and he prescribed a drug for me, and I started taking it yesterday. And then they can't participate. So it's important whenever you're changing therapy, or you think your therapy is not working, your tumors may be starting to grow a little bit, that's the time to ask, because you can lose your window very easily.
I think that's really interesting. It sounds like it can be very challenging sometimes to find a clinical trial that might really work for you. Mm-hmm. And so I'm wondering, are there other challenges that come around that aren't about whether or not you qualify? But I've heard this term slots before. What if there are no slots available? Is that really a thing, or what does that mean?
It really is a thing for early phase clinical trials.
Okay.
So oftentimes, I mentioned the phase 1 studies where they're trying to find the right dose. They'll treat a few patients at a low dose, and then treat a few more at the next dose, and then a few more at the next dose. Well, they can't just enroll all those patients all at the same time. They have to wait to see that the patients, the low dose, that everything went well, and a lot of times they have to wait 30 days from the point of starting each patient's dose to when the next patients can enroll. So when that happens, there's no immediate slot. And the patients are sometimes wanting to participate in the trial, but then they get told, well, the next slot's not going to open up for a couple of weeks. Do you want to wait that couple of weeks, or do you want to do something else, not a clinical trial? And that can sometimes be a tricky discussion for patients. Also, sometimes a clinical trial will be open, and they'll say, well, we have slots open for patients who are going to get the new drug with chemo, but we don't have any slots open for the new drug by itself. Those slots are going to open later, because many times for safety reasons, they don't open all the cohorts at the same time. And so that can be a challenge. And many times now, because clinical trials are hard to get started, there's a lot of bureaucracy involved, they've become a little bit more malleable since 20 years ago when I started doing this. And the result is that the study protocols kind of evolve, they open new cohorts, they issue amendments. And so the investigator really has to be really up to date on exactly what actually is open at any given time. I've one time opened a clinical trial from a big pharma company, and they said, Dr. Nieva, you only need to open our trial because we've got slots for all these different patient populations. We're going to test it in first line. We're going to test it in second line. We're going to test it in these patients. We're going to test it in those patients. And then they very quickly closed all the slots, and then they only said, well, now actually we only want to test it in this very narrow patient population. And I said, oh, well, sounds like I need to find new clinical trials for all my other patients. So that sort of thing can happen as well.
What's the best thing patients can do together to help get a clinical trial moving forward faster?
The best thing patients can do is actually enroll, because the faster we complete the clinical trial and we answer the scientific questions, the faster we can move on to the next scientific question. And every study we learn a little something, and then we want to move on to the next one. Of course, there's other things that people can do as well to get studies to open up. They can donate money to the organizations that fund research. There's lots of foundations that provide research support, places like Alchemy that help fund clinical trials, and other ways of supporting clinical researchers at a variety of places. But I think the number one thing they can do is participate.
I think that's a really good point. And you touched earlier on the fact that some centers might not be set up, some healthcare providers may not be able to offer clinical trials.
Most of them.
So if I'm a patient in that situation, does that mean I can't participate in a clinical trial?
Absolutely not. So, for example, here in the state of California, insurance companies are required to pay for standard of care treatments if you're participating in a clinical trial. So I have some patients that come to me at USC Norris, and they are in the most restrictive HMO that you can believe, with a very narrow network. But if I have their signature on a clinical trial document, now they can come to USC and they can get enrolled and they can participate in a clinical trial. They can get their CAT scans done with us. They can see us on a regular basis. They can have everything done sort of under that roof. So you can always talk to the people who are offering the clinical trial and ask, can I participate? And I think in general, even outside of California, if you sign a clinical trial agreement document, it's very unlikely that your insurance company would not let you participate. The other thing that you have to keep in mind is it's become a lot easier now with telemedicine to find out if you're clinical trial eligible. You don't actually have to go to the university to find out. You can schedule a telemedicine appointment. You can be home. This is what I do. Patients say they're interested in a clinical trial. Well, I'm not going to make them drive to Los Angeles. Nobody likes to drive in Los Angeles. I'll see them by telemedicine. I'll see them by telemedicine, and I'll get a sense of what their situation is and whether or not they may be able to participate. I can email the consent forms now. They can sign them by DocuSign or some other service and send them back to us. So we can really do a lot of these things electronically. We have a clinical trial that we do with Alchemy, the Genomics of Young Lung Cancer study. This is a distributed clinical trial where we're collecting blood of young people with lung cancer, building a registry and a specimen bank. And these patients come from all over the United States. We send phlebotomists out to the patient's home or send them to a Quest Diagnostics lab to have their blood draws done, get it all shipped in. They don't have to come to San Carlos, even though San Carlos is lovely.
I think that's really amazing. And so are there other aspects of clinical trials that can be done outside of a hospital or a cancer center? And are there certain things that you would definitely want to go to a cancer center for?
I think it's always good to have that contact with the cancer center. I mean, right now I'm doing a clinical trial where we're giving patients a atezolizumab, which is a checkpoint inhibitor, and we're giving it to them at home using a new subcutaneous formulation of that checkpoint inhibitor. We're doing all their visits by telemedicine. We're monitoring them with wearable smartwatches and with smartphones, and they're filling out their surveys on their smartphones, entering their vital signs. And then we have a nurse come to their house and administer the drug. So these patients don't have to come in. That sort of thing, I think we're going to see more and more of with time. But I do think you need to make that initial contact. And again, you still got to talk to a human for a few things. And I think finding out if you're clinical trial eligible usually means that you have to be talking to somebody.
Yeah. Dr. Nieva, you touched a little bit on consent. Are there other elements of a clinical trial that a patient should know about, other things that might happen if they are either trying to decide to participate in a clinical trial or if they do participate? Should patients be worried about the care they might receive? Are there other things that they can expect when they're participating in a clinical trial?
Yeah. So when you participate in a clinical trial, you will get this consent document. And that consent document is going to have more information than you ever want it to have. We'll tell you what happens on this day, and then it will go through and describe risks in excruciating detail of what are all the terrible things that could potentially happen to somebody. And it reads a little bit like the disclaimer on the TV commercials for drug companies. In some ways, the clinical trial documents, they want to be informative, give you all this information, make it very transparent to you. Sometimes the information can be overwhelming. And again, that's where you want to talk to a person. You want to talk to maybe someone who's been on a clinical trial like that or had the drug before. Again, contacting GoTo is a great way of meeting somebody who maybe has experienced that drug before to get a sense of what their experience was like. And then your healthcare provider, your doctor, should be able to distill the information down for you. And ultimately, you decide based on all this information if it's something you want to do. Oftentimes with clinical trials, there's a bit more testing that goes on. If you're used to getting CAT scans every 3 months, sometimes on a clinical trial, they might be every 6 weeks. They're going to take more blood than you think you might have in your body. They oftentimes take a lot of blood tests when you're enrolled in clinical trials. And so you do have to, it is really a gift when a patient chooses to participate in a clinical trial, because it really is usually some extra effort on their part to participate. Now, some people like that. They like the additional monitoring. They like the fact that they're getting more frequent scans to evaluate their disease. They may like the fact that half a dozen people kind of look in on them and call them and check in on them, and they get all these extra phone numbers that they can call if they're having a problem or a concern. But it is all spelled out in that consent document. It just takes a little bit of careful reading to know what's in it.
Okay, yeah, I've seen some of those consent documents. Those are the ones where I often just skip to the bottom, right, and then sign. But
yeah, it's a little bit like like reading loan documents.
Yeah.
Sort of at the same level of interest often.
A lot of trust goes into that, right?
It does.
Yeah. So we've talked a lot about clinical trials being a way to learn about something that's new. Mm-hmm. People don't often think of clinical trials also, though, as a treatment option, more of maybe like a last resort. So could you talk a little bit about that with respect to clinical trials?
Yeah, it's almost never a last resort. I mentioned earlier, you kind of have to be healthy to participate in a clinical trial. Most clinical trials ask whether or not a drug works in a very specific setting. And oftentimes that setting is as your first treatment or as your second treatment. When you've been through a lot of treatments, the phase 2 and phase 3 clinical trials usually won't enroll those patients. The phase 1 clinical trials often will still enroll those patients, but only if they're still healthy. You have to be able to get up and basically be in good enough shape that you could still work. But if the cancer started to take a toll on you and you're not able to work and you're thinking, I've tried all these other things, nothing's working, I'm starting to get very sick, maybe I should look into a clinical trial, that's too late. You really do want to get involved earlier on.
And the biggest thing about trials is, as a patient, you can leave the trial at any moment if you want to.
Absolutely.
So there's really no downside to going into trial. You do get all the extra tests. You get all the extra screening. You get all the looking at you, blah, blah, blah. And at any moment, if you decide that that's not the place to be, you have the right to leave. So there's really no downside to being in a trial.
That's absolutely right. You can participate or not participate in a clinical trial. Your doctor still actually likes you just as much if you choose to participate or not. There really is no expectation of participation by your physician team. And it's absolutely true that you can, to get out of the clinical trial, all you have to say is, I don't want to participate anymore. And you can just walk away and do something else. Or you can not walk away, stay where you are and say, okay, doc, I don't want to participate anymore. What are we going to do now? And a lot of times the answer will be, well, how about my other trial? Or the answer might be, well, let's try a standard of care option or something else along those lines.
And I'm thankful that you brought that up, because I do think it's really hard for patients sometimes to understand that they do have control over that they are the ones making the final decision. So I think that's a really important point. Probably hard to understand at certain points and hard to really, buy into, but, patients do have a choice.
No, the patients are 100% in control.
Yeah.
The physician offers the clinical trial, and the patients choose to participate or not.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think this has been a really enlightening discussion for me, and I did want to ask you one final question, which is, what do you most hope that those who have been involved in this conversation today, what do you hope that they'll take away from it?
Well, I hope the first thing that you take away is that clinical trials are generally good things. They're the way we get better at treating cancer patients. I want everyone to recognize that. And that if you choose to participate in a clinical trial, it really is a gift to other patients, because it's something you can do to make care better for more people. It does take extra work. And it does take a little bit of reaching out to talk to some people to find out if there's a good trial for you, where that trial might be. I wouldn't do it all at midnight all by yourself, sitting in front of your computer. I would do this talking to humans, either at a place that does clinical trials, or a place like Go2 that has counselors, or within your support group. But I would be talking to people who can help guide you through this process. And then recognize that if you do choose to participate in the clinical trial, it is going to involve sometimes a little bit of delays to get started, because there's a lot of hassle and paperwork and things like that have to be done. But at the end, the payoff is that you might get an opportunity to receive tomorrow's medicines today. If you were participating in clinical trials 20 years ago, you might have had an opportunity to get a drug called Taxol. Taxol was a great drug. It was a blockbuster drug. Well, it's not that exciting of a drug anymore. But if you participate today, we are making so many advances so quickly, particularly in lung cancer, where participating in a clinical trial gets you that chance to be on just that next rung of the ladder of new therapeutic innovations. A chance to get your checkpoint inhibitor given subcutaneously instead of intravenously, so you could get it at home. Or might give you a chance to get on some other very exciting drug, or maybe the latest immunotherapy. When these trials are developed, they're hugely expensive endeavors. They don't get carried out unless people have a really good faith idea that these are going to be useful medicines. And I think our success rate in clinical trials and our success rate in advancing lung cancer really has grown over the last many years. So you really give yourself an opportunity to really be in the latest advance. And then you also have that reassurance that if I am participating in a clinical trial, I know that what I'm getting is really cutting edge care. because we're not testing old stuff. And we're not testing 10-year-ago therapies. We're testing really modern treatments. And I think in the end, everyone wants to have an opportunity to get the most advanced medicines out there. And you can be sure that you're doing that if you're on a clinical trial.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. I think that was a really fantastic recap. Thank you again to Dr. Nieva.
Thank you, Courtney. It's been delightful.
We really appreciate you being here, and mostly really appreciate all of you that are here again to reiterate what I said in the beginning. I also want to thank Onyx and Ash, Penn Media, our partners, and the GoTo team, especially Michelle Zay, who helps put all of this together every month. Yeah, there's Michelle. And most importantly, thanking those of you who have participated in clinical trials. It really is because of you that the major advancements in prevention, diagnosis, treatment, and survivorship have come around. And finally, we have a very dedicated group of sponsors that make this programming possible for us every month. So I want to thank them as we close out. So we have Amgen, AstraZeneca, Bayer, Bristol Myers Squibb, Daiichi Sankyo, Eisai, Foundation Medicine, Genentech, Johnson & Johnson, Merck, Mirati Therapeutics, Novartis, Novocure, Regeneron, Sanofi, and Takeda. The ABCs. Thank you so much, everybody.
So I'll be brave if you're brave. I'll be brave, but only